Well, tomorrow at
Thanks,
6
Peter.
p.m, the polls will open in the UK for the general election, the first such December election in around 100 years. The choice is stark: Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, Brexit or Remain. While the Tory lead, they say, has shrunk in the past week, according to the most recent polls, Johnson's lead over Labor looks to have now stabilised at 10 points ahead as we enter the final 24 hours. Corbyn's leadership has again been under fire for the entire election campaign, first facing immense criticism over his handling of the Labor Party's anti-Semitic problems, and his own anti-Semitic problems, I might add. And today he was dealt another blow as a phone call was leaked that recorded a member of his own party disparaging the Labor leader's efforts. Labor's health spokesman John Ashworth was recorded saying that voters can't stand, quote, Jeremy Corbyn, and heavily criticising Corbyn's knowledge and abilities in national security. This comes following the warning last month by the former head of the MI6 spy agency saying Corbyn is a present danger to the UK, and our own former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer telling the Morrison government that they would need to reduce intelligence sharing with the UK were he to make office. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has turned his campaign efforts to the message of getting Brexit done as the country looks to meet its deadline for leaving the EU by the 31st of January 2020. Joining me now from the UK, live from London with all the latest 2GB broadcaster and Sky News host, the wonderful Alan Jones. Well, I tell you what, my two favourite men, you and my husband, are both over there in the UK, so forget the polls. I'm speaking to the Oracle. How have you found things when you've been on the ground? Because there's no substitute for being there.
Well, hello, Peter. Look, firstly, could I just say I thought I was in another world. Anthony Albanese's got an inner sanctum which includes Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan. Hello. I thought, what's going on here? And I thought also perhaps I should stop talking and breathing because we're still worried about carbon dioxide emissions and they can't actually tell us what damage they're doing. But there we are. That's the kind of world we live in. Look, 2 points I'd make to start with. Now, technically, Corbyn can win. Technically, he can win. He won't win, and indeed he'll be hammered. But technically, I think it needs to be pointed out that he is the only person that's capable of forming any kind of alliance with the range of splinter parties that exist. That is the Scottish Nationalists on the one hand, the Lib Dems on the other, the Greens as a group of independents who were thrown out of the Conservative Party. And last time, at the 2017 election, he actually got to 317 on that amalgamated group. Obviously, the golden figure here is 326. There are 650 seats to be contested, and so the magic figure is 326. Now, currently, Labor only have 243. They believe if they can get to 270, but I mean that means they've got to win 27 seats, they would be able to form a coalition with the Scottish Nationalists, who've got 35 seats. I don't think the Scottish Nationalists can hold their seats. I can come to that in a moment if we have time, with the Scottish Nationalists, and then the Democratic Unionists, that's the Irish group, plus the Greens, plus some independents. So technically, yes, Corbyn could form some kind of coalition and get to 326. I don't think he's got a hope in hell, quite frankly. There are many things that Corbyn most probably doesn't have going for him. The couple of things that he has got going for him are that since the election was called, 3.9 million Brits have enrolled to vote, another 3.9 million. Now, two-thirds of those are under the age of 35. So they would be a ready harvest for Labor. These are people who would say, well, wage policy here is flat, a bit like Australia. We're paying half our wages in rent and we'll never be able to own a home. So if you sprinkle those across, 150 of the electorates, then I suppose you could say technically he's a chance in relation to that. But the one weakness, I think, of the Johnson campaign, although there is one big strength, and that is he has really sharpened the Brexit story. And basically, even British people who don't understand and are fed up with Brexit understand that on the one hand, Johnson does have a deal, whether you like it or not, he's got a deal. And if you vote for him, you won't have to go through all this Brexit rubbish day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out. We'll be out by January 31. Corbyn, on the other hand, is in an absolute mess, and he's been butchered in the debates because Corbyn has said that, well, firstly, if he's elected, he'll do a deal with Europe. He can't articulate what the deal is. Then he'll put that to a referendum, but he then hasn't told the electorate which way he will support. Will he support an exit strategy or won't he? The whole of the front bench of Labor are Remainers. So they've got themselves in a complete knot. And Boris Johnson has really won that debate comprehensively. Where I think Boris Johnson, pardon me, has failed to prosecute the cases, and I heard your editorial on this, the economic policies of Corbyn are absolutely staggering. They're mind-blowing.
Absolutely.
In the first year, he has indicated expenditure will rise by $83 billion. He says that they'll spend $55 billion on infrastructure. He hasn't specified where that money will be spent. He has indicated that he will renationalise all the major services in England. That is, energy, water, rail, buses, the whole security structure. He'll get rid of all private schools, and he'll give a new home to every unemployed person on the day that he wins government. These are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Then he's proposing a national reconstruction fund of $400 billion. I mean, this stuff's a nightmare. Then he said to the corporate world, well, look, I know the Conservatives have reduced company tax from 26% to 19%, 28% to 19%. Doesn't matter. You can afford, we'll jack it up to 26%. Now, the headlines here say the capital in this country will just flee. It's gone. Now, Boris Johnson has, and then, of course, there's the expropriation, which you alluded to.
Well, Alan,
a range of companies
let me just jump in there. We'll talk about the Tory campaign in just a moment. But I want to hone in a point you made there. The increase, or the likely increase, in the vote of young people will be incredibly important in this campaign. Over 3 million. We know last time round they assisted Corbyn. He has gone out of his way with these policies you've just talked about, that I talked about at the top of the show, in order to basically buy their vote. How seductive is the socialist message now looking? We see this in the Democratic race in the US as well, for young people around the world.
Yes. Well, this is the Bernie Sanders of British politics, there's no doubt about that. Fortunately, voting here is not compulsory. I think many of these young people are on holidays. I don't think they'll turn up. So I'd be interested to see. There is no mood here. There is no mood either for the election or for Corbyn. Now, he had a meeting recently, what's today, Wednesday. He had a meeting on Monday in Bristol. Now, in 2017, when Jeremy Corbyn went to Bristol, there were thousands and thousands of people. They're going mad, they had placards and all the rest of it. He barely got a crowd. Basically, I think even Corbyn knows he can't win. I think even the Labor Party are hoping he can't. But the one thing I would say is this, that in terms of bribing voters, Corbyn and the Shadow Treasurer, McDonnell, make no mistake, they are fair dinkum. If they were, by some stretch of the imagination, to win, they would do all of those things on renationalising. They would have this massive expenditure, the bribery, the closing of private schools. That would happen. They are fair dinkum. And indeed, as they're lining up the next leader to replace Corbyn, they're wanting to go further to the left to make very significant social change. Now, I guess, Peter, to take your point, if you start promising everything to everybody for free, some people will be mad enough to believe it is free. But yeah, look, there is no mood here. No, there's no mood here for Corbyn at all.
I want to come back and just talk.
Corbyn can't win.
I want to come back after the break and just talk about some of the people that you've met and you've spoken to, some of the observations on the ground, sure. And we'll get into the Tory campaign. Yeah. Just stay with me, Alan. It won't be long. Still with me now, Radio 2GB broadcaster and Sky News host Alan Jones, live from London, talking the election, Brexit and many other things. Alan, it's interesting. Brexit obviously has been the whole story of UK politics for a number of years, a big feature of this campaign, of this year. Not so much a feature of the campaign, certainly an undercurrent, but in the last few days we've seen a real sharpening of the message from the Prime Minister. Now, I suspect Tories are wanting to push over the line what I'd call that old Labor vote, particularly in the north of England, because it's really England versus London in how this campaign's shaped up. Really to push some of those dyed-in-the-wool blue-collar Labor voters into the Tory camp on the basis of leaving the EU alone. How's that playing out, and what are people telling you? I know you've spoken to pretty much anyone who's important in the UK, bar Buckingham Palace, while you've been over there. You've had some extraordinary meetings. What's the feeling on the ground? What are people telling you?
Right, well, it's very interesting what you just said then. Obviously, the pioneer of this, who will go down in history as changing the whole direction of British politics, is Nigel Farage, though he has pulled his candidates out, and so the vote for him is only about 1.9%. But Farage is the person who, for 25 years, under UKIP and then under Brexit, said we've got to get out of here. We're the fifth biggest economy in the world. We've got to formulate our own future. We shouldn't be governed by laws of Brussels and so on. And on that basis, one of the big issues that's emerged in the last week is immigration. And Boris Johnson has been quite clear. He said, we're very pro-immigration, but we're not bringing people in here to settle. They've got to come in here to work. And he talks about the Australian policy. You mentioned North East. Now, the North East is very heavily Labor. In the past has been heavily Labor. But in 2016, they voted very, very heavily to leave. And given that this is first past the post, this is what Australians don't quite understand. It is first past the post. And if then the leave vote is taken away from Labor and Labor hate Boris Johnson and the Conservatives and never be seen dead voting for the Tories, nonetheless, the very heavy leave might vote for Brexit. Now, the Brexit votes up there, that's even though there aren't candidates in some of them, are up to 14, 16, 18 and 20%. Now, if that Brexit vote reduces the Labor vote, and I just last night was counting, there are 20 seats that I can count where the majority for Labor is less than 800 votes. Now, if the Brexit vote gets the benefit of Labor people who wanted to leave and they voted in the referendum to leave, and that's both in the North East, so on your map it's at 2 o'clock, and in the South East of London, which is on your map at about 5 o'clock down there, then the Labor Party are in trouble. I think they are in strife geographically in areas like Sunderland, in Newcastle, in Stoke-on-Trent. These are heavily Labor in the past, but they voted heavily leave. Now, Boris Johnson has sharpened the argument here, as I said earlier, on Brexit. The Corbyn position is that if vote for me and I will do a deal, but I can't tell you what the deal is, and then I'll put it to a referendum, but I can't tell you whether I'll support the exit strategy or not. And the whole of the front bench are Remainers now. You can imagine what this is doing in the North East, where they voted comprehensively to leave. They will not have a bar of Corbyn. Now, coming back to your point in the headlines in the papers today or last night about Ashworth, who's the shadow Labor Health Secretary, talking to a Tory mate, Health Secretary, talking to a Tory mate, and just said that Corbyn's unelectable. Look, there are many people who are quoted over here in the Labor Party who say that's the case, and indeed the manner of Corbyn, the bearing of Corbyn, the body language of Corbyn is basically that I've given it a go, I've done enough, but I've run out of time, I've run out of energy, I've run out of commitment, I've run out of ideology and philosophy, and I think he is gone. In relation to the Tory party, there are questions over Boris's. They keep going about his credibility and that he told lies once and fabricated a journalistic story and all the rest of it. And he maintains, and this question of trust, he maintains the reason there is a diminution in trust for the political class in this country is that in 2016 the electorate overwhelmingly voted to leave the European Union, which was called Brexit, and here we are, we still haven't left, and who are responsible for this? Namely, the political class. Why would people trust them? They took the mandate, they went to the election. Both parties went to the election in 2017. The Theresa May party, both exactly right.
It's not just a referendum. It's not just a referendum, it's been multiple elections that the winner has always been someone who says they'll make good on that decision to leave.
Correct.
Talk to me about the Scottish Democrats. Talk to me about the Lib Dems. Well, where do you think they're going to go?
Yes. Well, OK, I'll just go to the Scottish Nationalists first. This is very interesting.
Right.
They hold 35 seats, the Scottish Nationalists. Nicola Sturgeon is not at Westminster. She's not a member of the House of Commons. In fact, she's never been in the House of Commons. but she is the titular leader of the Scottish Nationals. Now, they are in a bind. I expect, and I may be wrong here, I expect the Scottish Nationals to lose seats. She is arguing comprehensively to remain in the European Union. But a condition of her support for Corbyn, if that was ever a likelihood, would be that there would be a second referendum for independence or for the removal of Scotland from the United Kingdom. Now, on the one hand, therefore, she is arguing in favour of staying in the European Union, but she wants to break the union of the United Kingdom. She wants to take Scotland out. Now, the bulk of the Scottish people, even though they are supporters of the Scottish Nationalist Party, are opposed to the removal, to the breaking up of the United Kingdom. So she's created for the SNP a very significant dilemma. Vote for the SNP and it's a vote to stay in the European Union, but vote for the SNP and it's a vote to leave the United Kingdom. So Sturgeon's, while she's very, very high in the polls and everything now, she's been fingered on these two contradictory issues, and as I said, on the basis of that I expect, particularly up in the northeast of Scotland, I expect the Scottish Nationals to lose votes. Coming then forward to the Lib Dems, I think the leader most probably will lose a seat, Swinson, and she's in all sorts of trouble simply because of the Leave vote, the percentage of the Leave vote in her electorate, which is at about 14 or 15% of her vote, and she can't sustain that. But the Lib Dems looked as though they were drifting a bit. 2 weeks ago, the vote for the Lib Dems collapsed. It was at 19%. Now it's I suppose, 11 and 12%, which is still very significant. I can't see them winning seats, the Lib Dems, but what they can do is to drag the disaffected Labor people, who are Leave people, into the Lib Dems rather than vote for the Tories. And in first past the post, this has the effect of reducing the Labor vote. So to that extent, the Lib Dems, I think, and Swinson are indirectly, and Sturgeon, without knowing it, are helping the Tory vote. However, summing all this up, it's very confusing to people, I guess, who aren't here, but summing it all up, Corbyn has to win seats. Now, the argument being that he doesn't have to win any if the others win. If the Lib Dems win and if the Scottish Nationalists win seats, then they may win enough to get to that magic 326. I think it's absolute pie in the sky, no hope in hell. If, on the other hand, you take the Labor argument that we will be able to form a coalition with all these minority parties if we get to 270, that means they've got to win 23 seats. I don't see that in any way happening. In fact, look, who am I? I'm an Australian, been out here for 5 minutes, but I think there's a risk of Labor being wiped out.
You've spent plenty of time in the UK, Alan Jones. Don't you dare be modest. And I know who you've been meeting with, so I know you've got the drum. I'm going to get you on tomorrow night as the polls open in the UK for the latest wrap. And, of course, we'll be looking at the weather because that will play a material part on whether they get the vote out. It's not compulsory in the UK to vote, but I really appreciate you getting up so well, although getting up early is not hard for you. But thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. Alan Jones, live from London.
No trouble. No trouble. Thank you, Peter.